What's going on, everybody? Happy Tuesday. Thank you so much for coming and joining us for our Tuesday update. I hope you're having a great week so far. Today, for our Wisdom for Your Week, we have an incredible opportunity just to interview with a doctor who's been serving on the front lines of the pandemic, working specifically with COVID-19 patients in New York City. And so today we're just going to have a short conversation with Dr. David Holmes, aka my dad. And so, Dad, thank you so much for just taking some time out of your day just to just have a faith-based conversation with us in regards to COVID-19. Could you tell people maybe who don't know you or who don't know kind of what you did, like about your experience in New York City and how that kind of went working with the COVID-19 patients?
Absolutely. And thank you for inviting me. So I was supposed to be going on a medical mission trip to Sierra Leone, and that got canceled. And so I had some time off of work. And then in New York, Governor Cuomo sent out a mass email just asking for people, whoever wanted to volunteer. So I kind of half-heartedly signed up. I didn't really think I was going to be called. But somebody called me the next day and asked me some more questions, and a little bit later I found myself at Woodhull Hospital in Brooklyn in New York City. So inside the hospital was totally different than outside. Inside was chaos, lots of people, very busy, and obviously lots of people who were sick, many from COVID. This was a designated COVID hospital, about 250 beds normally, and normally they have about 100 beds reserved for adult medical patients. However, they really needed the extra beds, so the pediatric patients, the psychiatric patients, and others, they transferred to other hospitals so that they could have more beds for the medical patients. They normally have about 13 intensive care unit beds, but they needed about 70. So they converted parts of their ER and parts of the general medical floors into intensive care units. And they had, during their peaks, about 70 patients on ventilators. And they had enough ventilators. Actually, FEMA gave them some old but functional ventilators, so that was useful. They had enough of the personal protective equipment, the PPE, so that was good. They didn't have enough dialysis machines. And one of the problems with COVID-19 is that it causes respiratory failure, but it also causes kidney failure. And so, again, during the peak, people were dying just because they couldn't get dialysis in time because of their kidney failure. The other problem was that once you got on a ventilator, it was really difficult to get off, and many people were dying from respiratory failure due to from COVID-19. They also didn't have enough oxygen tubing. They didn't have enough these central line kits and other medications that was essential for intensive care unit patients. So it was difficult. I've done several medical mission trips in other parts of the country, or parts of the world, and obviously this was totally different. But one of the similarities is that people were dying prematurely just because there weren't enough resources. And that was hard to swallow, especially in one of the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest country in the world, and still not enough resources to help keep people alive. So that was a struggle. When I got there, it was after the peak. So I got there a couple weeks in mid-April, and their peak was in early April. During their peak, they said that about 40 patients were dying every day. And when I got there, it was about 10 patients a day. Normally, they have maybe 15 people dying in a month. So this was a big challenge for all the hospital staff and everybody. The they were pretty discouraged as well as worn out from just all the deaths.
So, Dad, with all of the kind of the negative stuff that was happening in the hospitals and all of the deaths that you were seeing every single day, was there any like God moments or any faith-based moments or that you were able to share or anything that you saw where God might have been moving in the midst of the chaos?
Yeah, a few things. Personally, I was feeling kind of inadequate. So that was the word I kept thinking. I'm just so inadequate. I can't help some of these people. And God was, teaching me to just be content and just to keep going and use whatever skills He's given me to do what I can, and not feel like I have to do everything. That He's given other people other gifts and skills, so they can take care of people who are critically ill better than I can, and I just need to accept that and do what I can. I felt like it was just a drop in the bucket, and wasn't doing much, but I think God just reminded me that keep doing what He's given me to do, and if everybody is putting their drop in the bucket, then eventually it'll be full and the need will be met.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of patients, one of my jobs was to admit patients through the emergency room who needed hospital admission. And there was several patient stories that I could talk about. One of them was this middle-aged homeless man living on the streets. And first things I noticed about him, his face was covered with facial piercings. And I've never seen somebody with so many facial piercings. So that was a little bit interesting. When we started talking and developed conversation and some rapport, and eventually I asked him, so how many of those do you have? And he proudly said he had 130 of these piercings. But his goal, he said, was to break the world record, which he says was 540. So a little ways to go. But he came in because he was short of breath. Common story. And he also was coughing up blood, which was concerning. And he was struggling with alcohol, and his last drink was about a day ago. And he was starting to get a little tremulous, so he was getting some of the alcohol withdrawal symptoms. So we admitted him for COVID-19 pneumonia and a gastrointestinal bleed and alcohol withdrawal. We started talking about the alcohol. I asked him if he wanted to quit, and he said he did. And I asked him why, and he said, because if I don't, I'm going to die. And he did not want to die. And then my next question was, so what's going to help you quit? And he said one word. He said, God. Mm. And so that obviously opened the door to conversation, and I encouraged him in his faith and in that insight, because God can help us with all sorts of challenges, including alcohol addiction. And then I talked to him about hospital chaplains. I'm very thankful for the hospital chaplains in general, but especially at this hospital, that was able to talk to people and encourage them in their faith as they struggle with getting through their addictions. We also consulted a social worker to help with him to find a home and to help him get into an alcohol rehab program once he was stable enough to be discharged from the hospital. Another patient was about 60 years old, and she, at home, was developing shortness of breath, weakness, tiredness. She was living alone. She was married. Her husband was out of the country, and her children were grown and out of town. Her kids tried to call her on the phone, see how she was doing, and she didn't answer the phone. She said she just felt too tired to answer the phone. And so after a few days, the kids called the police and asked the police to go and check on her. And they did, and found her really lethargic and ill appearing. So they called the ambulance and brought her to the emergency room. And that's a big problem, is that a lot of people are dying at home because that's just what COVID does. If you get into respiratory distress and respiratory failure, and you don't get to the hospital, you can die at home. Mm. And so thankfully, her children were astute enough to call the police to go and check on her, because if they didn't, she probably would have died at home as well. So she came in, again, COVID positive, and we were talking about different things. I decided that because people were not allowed to have visitors, and it's understandable, why visitors aren't allowed, but I still felt really badly about this, because here are people struggling to breathe and are lonely and scared, and yet their loved ones can't come in. And sometimes people would drop their loved ones off in the emergency room, and that's the last time they would ever see them alive again. Mm-hmm. And I just felt badly about that. So I would admit patients through the emergency room, but then later on, sometimes I would just go up to the floors and see how they were doing. So one of my first visits with her in the hospital, she was telling me she has 6 kids. She's been married for 40 years. And a lot of times when patients tell me they've been married for a long time, I ask them, so what's the secret? What's kept you together for all those years? And she said very quickly, we fight, we wake up, we patch up. And then we fight again, and we wake up, and we patch up, and you get the point. And she said that in this beautiful Caribbean accent. And I thought that was a great point, that, conflicts is not the problem in marriage. Lots of marriages have conflicts periodically. The problem is not patching up afterwards. And so that was good advice. Then she told me that she went to church, and so I asked her if she had a favorite Bible verse, and she said, yes, 1 Peter 5:7, which is, cast your cares upon the Lord, because he cares for you. And so we talked about that, and then I asked her if she wanted to pray, and she did, and so we just prayed to cast all her cares upon the Lord, including coronavirus. And it was kind of a weird prayer. I felt funny praying to cast coronavirus on God, but he's immune, he can take it, and he can get rid of it. And so that's what we prayed for. The next day when I visited her, the next day when I saw her, she was feeling down, and I asked her what was going on. She said she had just heard that her brother-in-law had died of pancreatic cancer, and a really good friend of hers had just died of COVID-19. And so that was a struggle. And so we prayed for God to comfort her in the midst of those tragedies. Another time when I visited her, she was telling me how wonderful the nurses were to her in the hospital, and how caring they were. And then she started talking about how when she was a child, she really wanted to be a nurse, but her family just could not afford to send her to nursing school. And so she eventually became a certified nursing assistant. But now she's in her 60s, but she was telling me that when she gets out of the hospital, she's thinking about going to nursing school. And I just think that the nurses in that hospital had such a positive influence on her, and they kind of reignited that desire to be a nurse. So it's amazing the effect that people can have on one another, even in the midst of a busy hospital situation. And she was also felt really blessed about all the text messages and phone calls she got from people just telling her that they were thinking about her and praying for her. And she just said she just felt so blessed by all the messages from people, relatives, but also she used to help out with church camps, church youth camps. And people used to call her Auntie, the students, and she said she got a lot of calls from those students or messages, and that just encouraged her greatly. And so I'm convinced that helps with recovery. Those little text messages and phone calls and social media, etc. All that can be used for a lot of good things to encourage people and help them in their recovery.
Absolutely, and that's so cool, Dad, because it's so perfect for today. Because one of the things that's so important for us to realize in this current season is that no matter who we are, no matter our background, no matter if we're serving in New York City or Los Angeles, we can use our influence to make an impact for Jesus, even while in isolation. And so before you have to go, Dad, would you just say something? We have situations here in Los Angeles are very similar to New York City. Is there anything that you would say to just encourage our doctors and our nurses and our frontline workers during this season, especially?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I'm just so grateful for the full-time doctors and nurses and other staff who I encountered in New York City. I mean, I was just there for less than a couple of weeks, but the people that are there in, day out, some of them got sick. One of the physician assistants at the hospital died from COVID, and yet those who are healthy, they just keep coming back and just giving it all and doing their best. And boy, I just thank God for their perseverance and how much they care for people to keep coming back to work. And I found that in the midst of all that chaos and stress, one of the things that helped me the most was talking to the patients. And I know it's really hard when it's super busy, but thankfully when I was there was a few moments when it wasn't so busy. So I was able to just talk and listen to patients, and that patients, the last one I talked about, Mrs. C, she's on the last day, she knew she was about to get discharged. She was doing really well. And she gave me this $50 bill from her home country. And she had written on the $50 bill, it's only worth a few cents in American money. So I felt like it was ethically okay to accept it. Otherwise I wouldn't have. But she had written on there, to my doctor, thank you, keep up the good work. And that bill, I'm sure it was full of coronavirus, so I had to handle it carefully. But it was just such a blessing. It was such an encouragement. Here she came to the hospital with basically nothing, her wallet and her few clothes, and she just took out, this bill that she had in her wallet and gave it to me as a gift, and I will treasure that forever. And it just really reminded me of how important it is to allow our patients to be a blessing to us. So often the time we give, and we give, and it's important to be able to receive as well. And whether you're a patient or whether you're a healthcare provider, whether you're sick or whether you're healthy, either way we can be a blessing, and we can receive blessings. And it's important to do both.
Absolutely. Yeah. No matter what, wherever we're at, we can use our influence to make an impact for Jesus. And how would you, just as we close and as you got to go, how would you just encourage our church and our families who maybe we're not frontline workers? How can we still make an impact for Jesus during this season?
Yeah. Well, your church is already doing a lot with the gift lunch boxes and gift bags and everything. So that's wonderful. And those are all things that encourage people and point people to Jesus. And that's certainly an important role that people can play. And prayers, again, text messages, letters, all sorts of things that we can be doing. The other thing I think is let's not waste this pandemic. I think people just want to get through the pandemic, and it, boy, a lot of suffering is happening. So let's not waste all this suffering. Let's embrace the extra time that we have. In my own life, and when I talk to other people, we know what we should be doing, right? We should be eating healthy foods. We should be exercising. We should be, talking with others, or praying more, spending more time with God. But consistently, we have the same excuse: too busy, can't do that. And now that excuse for many of us is gone, that we're not too busy. Some people still are pretty busy, but a lot of us are not as busy. And so we really could spend time to help others, but also to help ourselves. And we help ourselves by, again, cooking healthy and eating healthy and exercising and helping ourselves spiritually and emotionally. Maybe journal writing, or again, just talking with somebody, making amends with someone. Intellectually, maybe taking a class online and learning more. But the more that we can do to improve our health, physically, emotionally, intellectually, socially, and especially spiritually, the better off we will be, including in terms of protection from coronavirus. As far as trying to prevent us from getting it, certainly hand washing, social distancing, all that is important for prevention. But once you get it, it's all about your immune system. I had a 80-year-old patient in New York City who had COVID-19, but she was fine. She hardly had any symptoms at all. So it's not just about your age. I had another patient who was a lot younger, but he had multiple health problems, and he ended up dying from COVID-19. So we need to do whatever we can to be healthy, not only for cardiovascular reasons, but for trying to prevent or treat COVID-19 or whatever the next pandemic is. And we do that by boosting our immune system. And we boost our immune system by, again, being healthy physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. And lots of medical research has shown the benefits of faith in terms of our immune system, in terms of our length of life, and our overall health and well-being. So we need to be growing spiritually, not just for our spiritual health, but for our physical, emotional, social health as well. It can have a huge impact. So a quote I heard recently that was kind of convicting to me is, if it's important to you, you'll find a way. If it's not, you'll find an excuse. And I think so often intellectually I know things are important, but reality, I find lots of excuses. But if it's really important, we'll find a way to use this pandemic for good, to grow ourselves and to encourage others.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Dad, for coming on and just hanging out with us and being able to just share your experience in New York City. It's so cool that even while, no matter where we are in the country or in the world or what situation it is, we still can make an impact for Jesus while in isolation. We can use our influence to make an impact. And at the end of the day, we may have worries, we may have cares, but just like that one patient's verse that you said, is that we have a God that cares for us specifically. He knows exactly what we're going through, and he is there to help us be successful during this season. So thanks so much, Dad. Love you.